Welcome to the Careers in Finance series on FinPod by CFI, where we sit down with finance professionals to explore their career journeys. Join us for ideas, insights, and inspiration to help you advance your career in finance.
Welcome to Careers in Finance. I'm Anna Talerico, and this is one of our first episodes of Career in Finance. So I'm very excited to showcase a career in finance from somebody that works right here at CFI. I'm with Vijay Maharaj, our director of FP&A. Hello, Vijay.
Hey, Anna. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me. It's kind of like you're being my guinea pig. And I'm very excited to talk to you about your day in the life, your role, but more importantly, just your career journey and how you ended up in FP&A and in this role. And by the way, I love the shirt that you're rocking. Thank you.
Well, I'm unlike many finance people in that I hate collared shirts and button-ups, so t-shirts are best. And if I can rep the brand, I'm going to rep the brand.
I love it. I love it. And tell us a little bit about the cat over your shoulder there. Who's that?
That's Gus. He's 8 years old now, and yeah, this is technically his room, but it's also my office, so kind of have to share.
He's sharing it with you. Yeah. Well, let's start with let's start with your educational background. Did you go to school for finance or something related? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I went to school for economics, primarily. So my undergraduate program I went to a business school, so they didn't have a traditional economics program. But what I wanted going into college was to actually become a professor in economics. So the closest I got was they had an economics finance program. So that's how I have some finance background. But after I graduated, I applied to grad school. Not the easiest thing to do coming out of undergrad, especially with nothing published or anything like that. So I wound up in a master's program at the University of Texas at Austin for economics. Did high level economic work for a year and a half and decided, that probably wasn't going to be the easiest path for me. So I ended up, looking around and trying to see what was around. So I was looking at data roles, finance roles, whatever I can get my hands on. And, I fell into a internship for a financial analyst role, and started to learn a lot of the ins and outs of the role there at a company called People Admin. That's where I met Kevin Meller, who's the CFO here at CFI. Yeah. And ever since then, it's been a lot of learning about what is really FP&A, which, going into it, I thought it was a lot of number crunching, a lot of hey, all you're going to do is look at spreadsheets all day. You're not really going to be doing anything. You're just trying to make sure numbers match and you're not running out of cash or you're profitable or whatever. And I've had a lot of great mentors in my journey here to this point where I've learned a lot of it's not just the number crunching is important. The Excel work's important. All that's important. But a lot of it is actually the communication with other stakeholders that more or less, FP&A, you're not a master of any of those other business domains. You're not a master of marketing. You're not a master of engineering. You're not a master in really understanding all those things of the bits and pieces and synthesizing that into something that looks like the financial statements that you can then go present to somebody to try to tell the story of what's actually happening in the business, which really and truly is what is the most exciting part of it, in my opinion, because it's not I know exactly what to do or in this situation. It's let me go talk to an expert. Let me go try to understand what they're seeing, model it out with their advice and whatever, and see if that comes to a result that we're agreeable on and we can actually go in action.
Yeah. Well, and as somebody who works with FP&A, works with you, I would say it's sort of similar for me in that oftentimes I'm collecting information and perspectives from across the business or even within a certain function. And I'm almost bringing it back to you to sanity check or to vet or to be, my sounding board in a way, right? So you're doing that with the business and then I'm doing it and it's kind of we're coming back together. Especially if we're trying to solve a problem or I'm trying to dig into something going on, I'm getting a lot of information, I'm synthesizing it, but then I want to get your perspective. So it's interesting. We both kind of are different sides of it, but it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I want to get into day in the life and everything, but first of all, so interesting because we've worked together for a while and I had no idea that you came to finance by way of economics. That's super interesting. I wonder how many people do that. That's, yeah, because I know a lot of people come into FP&A from being a financial analyst. So
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about that path. So you leave school, your first role, financial analyst, by the way, with Kevin Malore, our fantastic CFO. And so what was that like? So how long were you a financial analyst? And then what was kind of your next role after that?
Yeah, I was a financial analyst for probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it was a lot of like just understanding what how a financial statement's supposed to look. How do you reconcile data so that you can actually like trust what you're doing? And then from there, what does a forecast look like, right? Like, I think a lot of the great things that Kevin taught me was like, hey, you need to make sure whatever you're presenting is accurate. Like you feel like you're confident in the data that you're saying and you have the story and you can tell the story verbatim and like make people feel like they can trust it to go make decisions. At my next role, I worked at a company called Big Commerce, where I learned under director there how to really like start to then talk to people about, okay, how do we really think about our sales forecast? What does this mean for the business in terms of from a revenue perspective, from a cash perspective, and like start to like really bring those things in. And that was where I went to my next role as a senior financial analyst, which was where I started to really start to dig in more to that story element. Like, what is the story that we're going to tell? If we need to hire X amount of reps, what are we expecting them to bring in? If they're not performing, how do we think about rolling them off and then bringing it back in? Does that put us in a quota deficit at any point in time? Okay, how do we get around that? Like all these fun things where, people don't really think about all of it because it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, if you're not performing, you kind of have to make a decision, but then it's like, well, what are the ramifications of those things and how do we think about it from a business perspective? And does it put us in a situation where we have to act sooner than later? Like if we need to go ahead, if we know we have underperformance, do we need to go hire ahead of that, knowing that we're going to maybe lose some money on a cash basis from hiring ahead, but it's going to help us feel better about having the quota capacity in the like 2 to 3 months when we actually do part ways with the underperformer or whatever it looks like.
Yeah. So you mentioned something right before you got into the senior analyst role where you were learning that it's not just about taking the numbers and putting them in. It's really understanding the numbers and having confidence in the numbers. How do you do that, right? Even just going back when you were first doing it, but even today, how do you have that confidence in the numbers and that you know them, right, just as well as those that kind of own those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, so it depends on what the source. It's knowing where the source of data is supposed to come from. So, for example, if we're talking about accounting data, I need my accounting team to be like rock solid, rock stars, the best, in order to like make sure that whatever they're putting into our our CRM or whatever it is, it is accurate. Like they're not putting in something that's gonna be incorrectly amortized or is in the wrong period or the revenue is not getting recognized over a period of time. So it's having some trust there and then knowing where their backup is. So if they have their schedules all saved out in an Excel folder, okay, good. I can go there. I can go verify and make sure that it matches up with what I was thinking, or that this is why this variance is happening versus what I had planned for. And then really digging in and making sure that I understand and feel comfortable with what is being presented at a higher level, right? Because all that data gets rolled up more or less. And similarly, like if Salesforce is our source of truth for bookings I need to go through and make sure I understand how the data is getting pushed into Salesforce. Okay, is this getting entered by a rep? Okay, how are you verifying that the rep is selling? Okay, there's a closed one process? Okay, what are all the steps that take into account of them actually being the final number that we know is true and verifiable. So it's knowing what the source system is, understanding the process of how the data gets put in, and then always going back and verifying, like, does this match up with what you were expecting? And if it doesn't, go dig through, make sure that you see the thing that might be throwing it off from your expectation, and then like have that story in the back pocket of like, okay, yeah, we had this one-time event that happened here, or okay, this is a large customer that was booked this month, so we're going to see a larger pop in bookings and revenue. Or we thought we were going to see, most of our bookings come in on the 15th of the month, and actually happen on the 31st of the month. So okay, we're going to see a longer revenue recognition cycle, whatever it is.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that I think is really nuanced but important. It's like knowing the systems, but you mentioned knowing how the data is put in the systems, right? It's not just knowing the systems and the data and the source of truth, but really understanding how it's flowing in.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't know the process of how it goes in, like technically, like you could put anything through a system, and it might just be trash at the end of the day. So if the way that it's actually going through is not actually the way that you would hope for it to be recognized, then what you're getting at the end is not reliable, or isn't going to be matched up with how you're actually going to end up presenting it to whoever your audience is. Because you really need to understand the little nitty gritties. Like, okay, like here's a really silly one, but time zones. If you don't know when your payment processor, for it as an example, is time zone is set, like if you think that it's on the last day of the quarter, and it's like, oh yeah, it's gonna turn off at 12 central, at midnight 12 central, but it's actually set to PST, you got 2 extra hours of bookings that you're not actually accounting for. And now you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm shortchanging myself for this quarter, and now I'm giving myself extra benefit for the next quarter.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good example. Okay, so knowing the system, knowing how the data is flowing in, knowing that source of truth. You also mentioned the rockstar accounting team, for example, that you need, which I think we have, amazing accounting team here. And obviously, you have to trust the partners, right? So, how do the different lines of business that interact with you, like how can they show up to be great partners for you, right? If you described how you're partners for the business, but like, what do you need in the functional leaders, including accounting, but really across the whole business?
I mean, I think it's there. You mentioned like there's a level of trust that you have to have. And I think that's true for every business unit. Like I need people to trust that I'm not here looking to like, oh, go ahead and like say you're doing a bad job, or like, there's something about like divorcing the emotions of the actual process and the results of the process, right? Like really bad or at anything. I'm just saying, this is what happened. This is the results. That doesn't mean that the process was the best or anything like that. It's really about trying to be like, how do we then go take what we've learned from these results and then go ahead and go make improvements? Like, how do we do the best for ourselves, for the business, and everything like that? So like if sales is coming to us and asking for additional headcount for more sales reps, okay, why are we doing that? Even if people are missing their number, why are we going to go hire additional folks? Is there something that we can do to like boost it? Is it getting ahead of underperformance that we need to think about? Like, what is the reality that we're trying to do? Like, come to the table, not thinking like I'm coming here as a bad guy, going to go like slap your wrist every time because you didn't hit the number or whatever. That my goal is to make it easier to help you guys hit the numbers, or to come in at budget or whatever it is. Like, if you're in an engineering partner and you're coming in, it's like, hey, we need another resource, whether that be a full-time head or a contractor. Okay, why do we need it? Were we not delivering on our product delivery schedule? Like, do we need extra help? Or is there more bugs? Is it a more complex problem than we thought it was? What's the business case? What are we actually going to get out of it on the top line? Really like dissect the problem and have trust that I'm not going to come at you and say, yeah, this is a bad, like, you're a bad person for thinking this, because that's not the goal.
Well, you mentioned something that I find really interesting about interacting with you and your team. And I think this is important. You are objective, meaning when I was talking about earlier, when I'm kind of hearing things in the business or collecting my, information, oftentimes you're hearing conflicting information or you're looking at different, people with opposing views. And I always find when I'm coming to you, it's for like, okay, let's get objective now. But then also when I'm working with you and we're planning and things like that, you do have informed opinions and you do have a point of view and perspective. So there's this balancing of like understanding the business enough to have a point of view and perspective, but also being that very neutral, objective party, especially as the day to day, as like we're working through, managing and running the business.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like what we're trying to do is just try to look at it. How do we grow this thing, or how do we keep this thing going? And we have, like you said, all that information that we're processing, all that data that we're just seeing, and we're like, okay, these are the patterns that we're recognizing it, and we're trying to be like, take out as much emotion as possible from it, and just be like, this is what we're seeing from a results standpoint. Whether or not it's the right thing, the wrong thing, whatever it is, this is where we're at. So whatever we need to do to change or continue seeing those kinds of results, like let's talk about the options. Are the things that we did in the past working? Well, why might that had not have been the best decision at the time? Okay, well, maybe we didn't have all the information. You're never going to have perfect information. Like, unfortunately, no one in the world has perfect information. And if you do, I don't know what you're doing.
I want to know who you are. Yeah.
So that's the truth, right? Like we're essentially just information gatherers, and we're just trying to spit it back out in a way that can give folks a feeling of security that we're all making a good decision for what the business needs to go to.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so I'm going to first, actually, I have one more question before we do a little bit of rapid fire. Tell us about day in the life in your role. Like, what's a typical day look like, or typical kind of like just, monthly cycle, if you will. Tell us a little bit about what's a day in the life.
So there's a lot, vary quite honestly, from day to day, depending on what's actually going on. So if we have a board call coming up pretty soon. So a lot of it is taking all the quarterly results, getting it all prepared, making sure that we're aligned in terms of like what happened, what's the story that to help describe what happened, making sure we're presenting it all in a cohesive manner across the business. So that's, more or less this week and next week. If there's a month end cycle, it's helping accounting going through and making sure that like we don't have any questions on some of their entries, and making sure that we're all in agreement about like certain interesting or different nuanced occurrences that might have happened in the month. And then once they're done, then compiling it all into our monthly package, then presenting all those things to each of our business unit leaders so that they can see how they did, and then talk through forecast perspective of like, what do they see that's happening in their business that we aren't aware of, that we then need to go think about from a forecast perspective, like what does it look for like for the next 6, 12, 18 months, whatever that is. And then let's see, ad hoc reporting that may be asked. So if you have a question, or if our sales folks have a question, or if engineering has a question, or content has a question, we'll field them, and we'll try to do our best to get an answer out in a timely fashion. So you're balancing that as well. And then on top of that, there's any other random day-to-day activities from a reporting standpoint that you're trying to get balanced. So if you are in charge of like having bookings updated or from a weekly perspective for pacing to understand how we're ending up at the quarter, that you might have to do that in a day. If we have a cash flow forecast that we need to go update, we'll be updating that. More often than not, we'll be in our forecast file that we use, so we can update with all the new information that's coming in every day. Like, there's the funny thing is about a budget is like, that's a point in time view of the world. A forecast is a living, breathing thing, so you're trying to keep it as up to date and accurate as possible.
Yeah. And it wouldn't be a day in the life without at least one fire drill, I imagine,
course,
right? Of course, yeah. Okay. Put you on the spot, a couple of rapid fire questions. Favorite part about being an FP&A professional?
I think it's the constant learning, right? Like you can't be successful in an FP&A role without having some level of curiosity. So like being able to just constantly learn, like I said, you're not an expert in any of the other business units. So like learning from experts is really, really fun.
Yeah. Okay. And any advice or lessons learned or skinned knees that you can share?
Yeah, always have a check. So like if you think something's supposed to balance, have a check. Or if you think something is supposed to be XYZ number, have a check. Just have your checks so that way you feel like, okay, this all ties out, or this is going the way I hope it was to go, or like, where you always have what your expectation is supposed to be, and then make sure that your model is either meeting that expectation, or if it's wildly out of whack, you really need to then go dig in and find those issues. Like that will do it. That'll help you forever. And then if you are like me, have autosave on your files, because I am the worst at remembering to hit that little save button. So yeah.
That's a painful lesson. That's a painful lesson to learn. So probably listeners, some might be not in finance yet, coming out of school or in another role. They're thinking about getting into a finance role. Some might be in finance roles thinking about moving into FP&A. Any advice for somebody who wants to be an FP&A professional?
I really think, like I said, having that curiosity mindset is going to suit you really well. Like be really strong on your Excel skills. Have like, this is more or less table stakes. Like Excel skills, knowing what the right financial terms are for your industry, knowing your metrics that you should be looking at, like having those things like down pat is the stuff that's going to set you well for your foundation. And then just being curious, like never feeling like, oh, I know everything, or I can go ahead and do whatever without talking to this person. Like always err on the side of, well, let me go ask. Let me go try to learn some more. And then, take all that information, synthesize it as much as you can, and then just try to learn from it is probably the biggest advice I could give.
Well said. Vijay, thank you. This was fantastic. I know that already that I'm going to ask you back because I've already got follow-up questions. Thank you so much. And thanks for being so amazing. You have an amazing team. And thanks for being my guinea pig. I loved it. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Appreciate it.
All right. See you around, everybody. Thanks for joining and listening in today.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. FinPod is brought to you by Corporate Finance Institute, the #1 rated online provider of finance and banking training, certifications, and productivity tools.